Hi guys, Nicky here for a video on getting started with Ansible. So I'm going to, in this, hopefully demonstrate how easy it is to get up and running with Ansible for network automation. But firstly, I just want to quickly go through a couple of slides as an overview for Ansible to help you get familiar with some of the terminology that you will hear with regard to Ansible. So firstly, it's an agentless multi-vendor solution. So what that means is that unlike some of the other automation solutions, such as Puppet and Chef, you don't have to install an agent on the device that you wish to automate. So this is important when we're automating Cisco routers and switches, for example, which don't allow you to install agents onto the devices, and you must manage them through SSH. It was originally an open source project, but was acquired by Red Hat in 2015. And this can be important for organizations who are looking at Ansible and require the comfort that they're backed by a large corporation that will continue to develop the product into the future. It's available as a free download, as I demonstrated in the last video, but there's also a commercial paid for version that you can get full support from Red Hat, which is known as Ansible Tower. So you may hear that being mentioned as well. And it's easy to get started. Hopefully I'll be able to demonstrate that you don't need to be a programmer to get up and running with Ansible quite quickly. So just on the operation of Ansible and the terminology around that, you will hear about the playbook as the file that contains the instructions that we want to automate our network. And this is written in YAML, which is a human readable markup language that you'll see in a couple of minutes is quite intuitive and easy to read. And then within that file, the playbook, you'll have your plays. So a play is essentially a group of hosts, whether it's routers, switches, or firewalls, that you want to execute a number of tasks against. And then within each play is your tasks, which is the action that the Ansible will execute on your target devices. And as I said, it's written in YAML, which is very easy to read formatting language, and it allows you to declare variables and lists and dictionaries, etc. And finally, you will hear Jinja 2, which is installed. When you install Ansible, Jinja 2 is also installed as well. And that's the templating language that I'll just demonstrate as well. So on this slide here, I'm just trying to show a quick example of the key files that you will use when working with Ansible. So this file in the middle here, which I'm calling syslog.yaml, this is our main network automation script. And I tried to just highlight in the different colors to demonstrate how the main file itself in blue is known as the playbook, as we said. And then inside that we have our play, and then inside our play in green we have our tasks. And I'll explain when we look at our actual scripts what these parameters that we have configured here mean. And then on the left we have our inventory file, the hosts file, and that file will contain all of the hosts that we want to automate. And you can group it, so you can have routers and switches, or you could have countries, like devices per country, or whatever makes sense in your organization. And then this .j2 file is an example of a Jinja file, and you can see here that we're referring to two variables. And when the script is run, these two variables that are inside the double braces will be populated with the syslog server variable that we declare in our playbook. So the syslog, when you create a template, it's essentially your running config that you want to deploy to a device, and anywhere you have the braces will be the variables that you will control via your playbook directly or in variable files. And then finally on the right, we have the command that actually runs the script that I'll demonstrate in a couple of minutes, which is the Ansible-playbook command. And just go back there. And the -i parameter is telling it against which host, so the host file that you want to run this. And finally, the syslog.yaml file is the playbook that we want to run. So this bit is some programming language. I did say that you don't need to be a programmer, but as you get more comfortable with Ansible, this will become very intuitive. But I'm just presenting it here at the moment. I'm not going to get into the variables and different constructs, programming constructs that we have here. But if you do have any programming background, or if you've done it in college, then some of this terminology will be familiar, such as a list or tuple that lots of programming languages use, and in particular Python. And then your conditionals, like a for loop in this example in the box on the top right, we're looping through a number of interfaces and assigning them to access VLAN 10, for instance. And also you have your dictionaries, which are key value pairings, which I'll go into in more depth in a later video. So that's it for the overview. So I'm just going to switch back to my Linux host. But before I do that, I'll just remind you that my topology is very simple: 6 routers, 2 switches, a management switch, and a CentOS 8 Linux machine where we will run our automation from. So if I SSH into this machine, I have a number of plays already prepared, but I'm just going to start off with the inventory file, the host file. So in here, I've listed all of my devices, and in square brackets before some of these devices, I have them grouped. So the 2 core routers, I have put them into a grouping called PE. The 4 CE routers then are in its own grouping, but you can also have a hierarchy of grouping. So in this instance, I've created a group called routers, and the children of this group are PE and CE. So in a minute we will see how we can run tasks against any of these groupings here. And then I also have my switches grouping. And in here I've also configured some keywords. So the Ansible host, the IP, which is the IP address of the device, or if you're using DNS, it could be a DNS name. We declare what the network OS is of the device. So this could be iOS or NXOS, or if it was a Arista EOS or whatever. And then the credentials used to log into the device, which is the Ansible username and password. So in this directory, I have a number of plays. So if I look at the first play, play1.yaml, what we can see here is my play is what I've labeled network getting started first playbook, and within that I have 2 tasks. So the first thing that you have to configure is the connection type, which here is network CLI, which is a connection type that was released in a fairly recent version of Ansible. Previously, for when managing networking devices, we would configure the connection type to be local. And what that means is that when Ansible runs, it actually runs on this CentOS machine, not on the device itself. So when Ansible was set up originally, it was set up to automate primarily Linux or Unix servers. So the way it operated was the script, your YAML file that you create would get transferred down to the host that you wish to automate against, and it would run it locally as opposed to running it centrally. With when we're automating Cisco devices, we obviously can't do that. So what we do is we we run the playbook from the host uh, CentOS box in this instance, and it does an SSH connection out to each of the devices and passes the instructions through the SSH connection. And it's this keyword here, network CLI, which is what they call the connection plugin, that is the programming code underneath the hood that will perform those actions. Then we have gather facts. So facts is another keyword that you'll hear mentioned in Ansible a lot. So usually when Ansible connects to a device, it gathers information about that device. So in the context of a router, that information might be the show-var or how much memory it has installed and how much memory it has used, or the interfaces that are configured on the device. And it refers to all of that information as facts, and it stores it in variables that can then be used by this playbook to perform certain actions. So when automating against a Linux machine, we can configure this gather facts as true, but in the case of the Cisco device, there is a dedicated module, iOS facts, which is our first task here, and this is what this particular play is going to do. But firstly, the host file, the host parameter here refers back to that inventory file and to those group headings that are in square brackets. So in this instance, I have declared routers, and that's the parent grouping that has the PE and CE. So this playbook is going to run against all 6 routers. And then we move on to our tasks. So under our tasks, we have 2 tasks which always start with the dash here. And in fact, what I forgot to mention is that all YAML files always start with these 3 dashes at the very beginning of the file. So that's very important. And the indentation here is also very important. If you have these indented slightly out, the playbook is not going to run, and it's going to throw up an error message. So this first play here uses the iOS facts commands, and the gather subset I've set to all. So I could set that to say, for example, interfaces, and the only fact that it would then gather is the interfaces on the router. And then with the register command here, I can take the output and put it into a variable. In this instance, I'm calling the variable output. And then as part of this playbook in the next task, I want to display what the content is of those facts that I've just gathered. And we do this with the debug variable, and we just declare var equals output that we registered the output to. So let's start off with running this playbook. So I'm expecting this playbook initially to fail because of an SSH key check. So let me just run this for starters. So here we're starting off with our play and our first task, and it's going to throw up an error message, but I wanted to just allow it to fail on the first run, because what happens here is it connects to the devices, and normally when you SSH to a router for the first time, it'll ask you to accept the SSH key, and in this instance Ansible is not configured to accept it, so it's displaying an error. But we can control this behavior through the Ansible CFG file that is in our central Ansible folder, which is etc/Ansible, and the Ansible CFG file is there. So what we can do is we can edit this file to tell it to accept the key automatically. If we edit the file directly, then there's a lot of parameters in this file, as you'll see in a moment. But if we edit this file directly, it means that for every playbook we create in whatever directory on this CentOS machine, it will be affected by this central ansible.cfg file. But we can also copy it into our local directory if we want to make changes to it that only affect the playbooks in our local directory. So let's do that. So we just copy the central one and put it into this directory. So now we have ansible.cfg there. So if I edit this file, there's quite a lot of information in here, but one of the parameters is which I just find now, this one down here, host key auto add. And if we just uncomment that, it's set to true, and as it says here, it will automatically add the SSH key to its known SSH hosts file. So having made that change, if we run our playbook again, we should now successfully run. So it just takes a minute while it connects to all the devices. So this OK message here now is telling me that it has successfully connected to all the devices, and it's displayed our facts for every device. So these, if we just look at these for one of the devices, router 6, you will see that it grabs things like the show run here, the host name, which is RTR6, and it assigns it to a variable Ansible_net_host name, and we can now refer to this variable in our playbook, and when we go through each of the hosts from router 1 to 6, this variable will have a different value depending on the host. Oops, ignore that. And we have our interfaces and all of that information there as well, and things like our total memory and total memory free, and lots of information. So that's the first playbook. So in my second one, we're going to refer to some of these variables. So this is exactly the same as before, in that I have my first task is I'm just grabbing the iOS. Sorry, that's the wrong one. It's actually play 2. I open the same one again. So in this one, the first one is again just grabbing the iOS facts. This time I'm not storing them in I'm not registering the output of this task. Instead, I'm just displaying two of the variables, Ansible_net host name and the OS version. So if I run this playbook, and again we just wait, and this time the output will refer to those two variables, and we can see each of the hosts are running the same version of iOS. So this might be useful if you wanted to check if any host was not running the version that you intended it to run. So that's the two basic ones, but I have just two other ones here where I can demonstrate some of the other modules that we can use. So this next play here now, I'm going to change the name of the play to grabbing show IP interface brief. So we can, this is an arbitrary name. We can give this any name we like. So we just call it gather show IP int brief. And then the tasks, again, give it any arbitrary value. And we can just call it task 1 show IP int brief, right? And it'll display the output. So we, of course, I should mention that the module we're using this time is iOS command. So Ansible has lots of different network modules, as I was saying, for the different vendors, and they're all got similar names. So in this case, it's iOS underscore command, but you might have NXOS underscore command or EOS underscore command, etc., depending on the device. And this time we again register the output and we display the output. So the output is provided in two formats. Standard out. One is in it's in line format, and the other is just regular format. So what we'll do is we can create another one. So if I just do shift IP, and we'll see the difference between the two. So we just have two tasks, and then let's run this, see how it runs. So you can see that the first run of it, standard out, is hard to read, but the second one, standard out lines, is much more easier to read and what we would expect when we log into a router. So here we've just gone in and done a show IP in brief, and we can see all the interfaces and their status on each of the devices. And the final playbook for this video is just to demonstrate how easy it is to run backups with another module. So in this case, I'm running iOS config. So the previous one was iOS command, which you can use to run any command that's supported on your iOS device. And in this command, this iOS config command, we often use it when we're dealing with templates, which I can run through in another video. But in this instance, I'm the parameter I'm giving the iOS config command is just backup and setting that to yes. So I'm going to run a backup against all of these devices, and let's see what the output of that one is. So again, we use the Ansible playbook, -i for our inventory file, and backup. And what this will do is it will run the backup, grab the config for each of the devices, and create a backup directory in the directory that we ran the script. And if we go into backup, we will see that we have time-stamped configs for each of our devices. And by looking at any one of those devices, we just have our regular running configuration. So you can see how easy it is to back up a large number of devices in an automated way. So that's it. Hopefully that all made sense, and it is hopefully it does look simple that to just get up and running with some of the basics, the iOS command to run any command, and then iOS config, which I'll go into in a bit more detail, but to do simple backups. And that's it for this video. Thank you very much.